Hello, welcome to A Lesson Before Writing, episode 29. Ted Morrissey here with my co-hosts, Grant Tracy. This is Grant's most recent book that 12 Winters has published, A Shoeshine Kill, one of the Hayden Fuller novels, the fourth Hayden Fuller novel, as a matter of fact, and the paperback edition has 4 bonus short stories, Eddie Sands short stories. So that's very cool. Also here with Brady Harrison, and this is Brady's novel that we published this past summer, A Journey to Al Ramel. And the paperback edition has an afterword and also an interview with Brady. That's very cool. So highly recommend that. And I will plug my forthcoming book, Aspiring Child, a collection of sonnets, which is a biography of Mary W. Shelley. And that'll be out in January, but the pre-sale starts actually in just about a week or so on December 1st. Never tried a pre-sale before with our books, so I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens. And of course, those of you who are loyal podcast followers know that we will have a story that we talk about later in the broadcast, which is from Mississippi Review, which we haven't done a Mississippi Review story before. So anyway, good to see you guys. We're back in our normal spots, separated by hundreds of miles. We were all together in Cedar Falls just a month ago. It seems like only yesterday. What a quick month it seems like it's been, as far as I'm concerned. But that was a great time. We had a great turnout at Cedarhurst, or Hearst Center for the Arts, rather. Great turnout and great questions afterward. And I had a great time hanging out with you guys in 3 dimension and all that stuff. So I don't know. I think it turned out very well. That pod. I don't know if you guys have gone back and listened to it or whatever, but I think we didn't embarrass ourselves too badly. I don't know, Grant. Have you got, being the local boy there in Cedar Falls? Have you got?
I got a lot of nice feedback from peeps. I was worried about embarrassing myself, in my backyard, all that stuff. But it went great. I mean, people seem to enjoy it, and we inspired. I like it when I hear from a student that after our talk they got inspired to write for a few hours. So that was good. So that's always a bonus. So yeah, so I thought we were in the pocket. We were like Frank Sinatra with Quincy Jones in his orchestra. So yeah, we did great. So,
Well, we also were dealing with a very different format because of the structure of the reading and having to crunch everything down to 45 minutes. And then we had time for Q&A afterwards, which obviously we don't normally do. So yeah, I think all things considered, it was pretty successful, if I say so myself. Brady, I take it you haven't been hiding in shame for the last 4 weeks because of our performance?
No, not because of the podcast, of course. Nevertheless, yes, in hiding, yes, acute sense of shame over just life in general. Yeah. So, but the podcast, it was so much fun. It was so great to see you guys, and Melissa and Karen, and to get to hang out and meet Jim. So yeah, it was a real pleasure. There were there were things that I wish after I watched the video that I had said. Like there was so much more but we were compressed with time. But it was a blast, and so I'm looking forward to Baltimore. Is
yeah,
that where,
baby.
is that where we're going next?
Yeah, taking the show on the road, AWP 2026.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
The
we had
only
talked
thing I was,
about. Go
I was just,
ahead. Go
the
ahead,
only thing I
Grant.
was ashamed about was my pool game. It was the worst. It was so
Yeah.
bad.
Well,
Jim O actually was really good. I was the weak link. We didn't win a single game. It was embarrassing. Ted here was like a pool shark, but
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm thinking about giving up the teaching game and going on the billiard circuit. Yeah,
that's
yeah.
Ted Morrissey. Yeah, you were awesome. But yeah, ugh.
I was going to say in Baltimore, we're planning on doing some interviews with writers while we're there, and and then turning those into some bonus episodes, et cetera. And I was going to mention that one of the things we talked about, I think, when we were in Cedar Falls was what might be cool is if we interviewed some podcast alums. We have a featured story and a featured author, therefore, every podcast now, every episode for 3 years, and so that's quite a few authors. And I'm guessing a few of them will be in Baltimore. So anyway, if you're listening, former featured authors, and you're going to be in Baltimore, reach out to me, and we'll definitely make plans to get together and do an interview. I'd love to hear, like what people are up to. In a few cases, people have caught us up with the fact a book is coming out here or something's going on there, and that's terrific. But I think it'd be great to get some podcast alumni for some interviews. So again, reach out if you're listening. But otherwise, we'll try to track you down when we're there. But not just that. We obviously can try to get some other folks in the mix as well. But I think that'll be great.
Yes.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Well, I was just going to mention, I've just had a spate of publications, which is not. I like to have kind of a steady flow, or think that I do. But for whatever reason, the last few weeks, in fact, I got to check my notes. There's been so many, but I've had a couple of my speculative fiction pieces come out, including in one journal that's all they publish is speculative fiction. And I kind of bring it up in part because we're obviously talking spec fic today with the featured story, and it seems to really be a trend. But I had a story, Cool the Grass, which is from my speculative fiction work in progress, came out in Black Sheep number 30. Hell Itself, a new speculative fiction journal, is publishing The Unbearable Sweetness, and they've already nominated the story for Pushcart Prize. And then I heard from Poetries in English, which is a newish journal that published my story, The Poet of Room 12, a couple months ago, and they let me know that they had nominated it for the Best American Suspense and Mystery Anthology, which I've never had that happen before. So that was all very cool. So that stuff has been happening, and I got the new book coming out. So yeah, things are great. I don't know if anyone's reading them beyond the editors who's publishing them, but it feels good to have stuff taken. Oh, and I forgot to mention my first section of my Edgar Allan Poe inspired novel, which had been on hiatus for a while, finally got picked up and is coming out in an anthology called Fearful Symmetry from the Dionysian Public Library is the name of the press. And that's stoked my interest in getting back to that novel as well. So what have you been up to? I know, Grant, you said you did a comedy set as part of some project. What was all that about?
Well, my buddy Joe wrote a short film called Type 5, and it's about two mopes who decide it's a bucket list thing. They want to do stand-up. And so we were working on the script and the scene work, and I'm the guy that's all energetic and excited about this, and he's the one that has a moment of crisis because he thinks he's going to suck. And starts to chicken out. And I'm like, it doesn't matter how we do it. It's like what we bring to each other. We have fun. Let's do this. And so anyway, we got thinking about it, and we did a 5-minute sketch or comic, open mic. 5-minute stand-up in front of a bunch of friends at Joe's house. And it went okay. And then we thought, that's in the movie. That's going to be in the movie. And then we thought, okay, now the guys have to perform at a real club, and we were going to fake it and create a club by borrowing a space on campus like the Interpreters Theater or something and getting a bunch of friends. Then we thought, no, let's go full existential angst, baby. Let's do the real thing. Let's go method acting. And so we went to and God bless Matt Anderson. He allowed us to film ourselves. He's the host of Open Mic at the Octopus, lovingly called the Puss by us locals. And we performed at the Puss. And we had 4 minutes each. I, being my usual loquacious self, went 1 minute over. My bad, and I apologize, Matt. Bad boy. I didn't realize that a light was flashing at me, and I knew that was the 1 minute to go light. But somehow I guess I went 2 more minutes, and I thought I was only going 1 minute. But Joe stayed within the parameters, and we got laughs, and so we have to rewrite the ending because the original ending of the film was going to be us laughing, feeling like successes. And a couple of people look over at our table, go, "You guys suck," and then we just look at each other and laugh, and that's the end of the movie. But now, because we didn't suck, we got to come up with a different ending. But it was great. I mean, I think I have a natural pattern for talking fast. I mean, I wasn't that funny, but I was funny, and Joe was funny, and it felt like a triumph. Yeah. I'm not saying I want to do it again, but I enjoyed the experience, experiencing the experience in a method way. And now I'm like, what's next? I'll have to figure something out, some other, endorphin rush. But yeah, it was cool.
Well, I want to bring Brady into this, but while I got you on the screen, you also your film by the Stars of St. Michael has been accepted into a film festival. Is that right? I
Oh,
know it's
it got the local guy here, Greg Holt, who runs the local theater, um, wanted to screen my film. It didn't get into their festival, and he felt bad about that. And he's like, "I want to have a night of your film and Joe's film." So we had it last night, and I drummed up. I called out favors. I called out my markers. Guys and dolls talk. I called out my markers, and academe, theater, and church people, and 50 people came. 48 of them I brought to the theater. So it was awesome. And they loved it. And I got some nice feedback, and Joe's film they loved. And so we did a double feature, and then we had a Q&A afterwards up on the stage. And it was really super special. And my actors are in my film. I think we're really pleased to get that recognition. So yeah, it was super. But I'm still plugging away, trying to get in the festivals. But my movie just it doesn't look it's not polished. So if you're looking for Ben-Hur, forget about it. But if you're looking for a movie like Cassavetes' Shadows, put mine in your goddamn festival. You know what I'm saying? So it's a DIY. It's shot with an iPhone. The shots don't always match in terms of lighting, the sound, depending on where I put the microphone. Some actors are a little higher in the mix than others. Fuck it. Come on, man. It's a really good movie. And but I haven't been able to get into 3 festivals so far. There was one where that was close, but I didn't get in. So I'm still knocking at the door. We'll see what happens. But this was a big night for us. We had a blast.
good, good. All right. Well, Brady, I didn't mean to keep you in the wings quite so long. I assume you're still working on your Hemingway inspired stories, although you've been busy teaching and things like that. What else is going on literarily or any other way you care to share?
Oh, well, just listening. First of all, congratulations to you both. I'm so delighted for you guys. You're not only are you sexy beasts, but you're sexy beast writers. Uh, so, so cool. Yeah, no, I've been working away on the Hemingway stories, and enjoying that immensely. And I have no idea if they're any good, or if what the collection will look like, if it'll come together. But at the same time, I've been mapping out and have also begun work on what I'm calling a short novel. It's a kind of existential action thriller with a little sort of more commercially minded, try to reach a kind of audience, a little broader audience. So I'm pressing hard on the Hemingway, and want to get as soon as I can to the novel. Uh, yeah, and otherwise, been teaching this graduate seminar and the course is titled American Monuments.
All
And I
right.
think I've mentioned this before. So we read Moby Dick first, and then Ellison's Invisible Man, and then Infinite Jest. And we're finishing the semester with Lost Children Archive. So what I've been doing is reading.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
good.
Well, I'm on the other end of the spectrum. I'm teaching my class in the long story and novella. So, a class I love to teach, but have not had to spend the hours of reading that you obviously have had to spend. That's impressive in and of itself, that reading list. So,
Well, and my second course, my undergraduate course is a course on the novella, and that's so much fun. I think we've probably done about maybe 11. I cut a couple to try to give a little bit more breathing room. So I think we've done 11. And then we watched film treatments of a couple of films, The Body, Stand By Me,
Hmm.
and A River Runs Through It. We didn't read the novellas. I mean, some of the students had. We didn't discuss the novellas, but we discussed the films. And that, the course is just so much fun. And it's a
Hmm.
nice balance to the most whacking big books in the monuments class.
So what is,
Right.
you guys are the experts on this. What constitutes a novella? How many words? Like I finally figured out what microfiction is and flash fiction and sudden fiction and
Hint
long story.
fiction.
You know,
Don't forget hint fiction.
but how long? Like when does it become a novel instead of a novella?
Well, I'll be interested to get Brady's input on this too. But one of the first things we do, or the first thing we do in the course I'm teaching, is basically I ask the students that question. What do you think? And one of the things that we've discovered. I've been teaching this class a number of years, so I've discovered it several times. But anyway, they've discovered that the limits and so forth have changed over time, because it used to be, when people read more and had more patience for reading, a short story could be 10, 12,000 words easily, and then you started to get into more the novella range, but now I think it's really kind of been broadened, but I would say anything between, again, maybe 15,000 words is a really long short story, and 50,000 words is kind of the bare minimum for a novel. In fact, some people would say no, it's more like 60 or 70,000 words. So that's a really long, that's a big, scope in there in terms of between 15,000 words and 50,000 words. So I don't know, Brady, what are your thoughts, or what do you talk about in terms of what length constitutes a novella?
Yeah, so yeah, I'm pretty flexible on that, and certainly it's true that when I teach this course, it's really a mix of long stories and novellas, but nothing I would think as long as a novel. I always think of The Great Gatsby as like that's a novel. It's not a novella.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so we read Bartleby and Kafka's Metamorphosis, and I think of those as long stories.
Mm-hmm.
Nonetheless, teach them in the novella class, and then we'll read works as long as Michael Ondaatje's Coming Through Slaughter, and we're ending with a very short, a little tiny novella. Really, you might even consider it a long story. Claire Keegan's Small Things Like These. So, yeah, I would say like 50 to 100 pages in book published form. That's what I think of as a novella. However many words that is, something under 60,000 for sure.
Oh yeah,
Well,
I think
go
under
ahead.
50. I think under 50,000. I mean, that novel November novel thing or whatever. I can't remember what it's called. My daughter does it all the time. I think 50 is the goal to write a novel. So they consider it industry standard 50,000. And maybe I'm being sensitive here because all my novels are 60,000 words. And I think of them as novels, not novellas.
Oh no, yeah, no novels for sure, I
Yeah.
would say. Yeah.
So yeah, 50,000. That seems like a lot to me. That seems like a novel. And I think of those old, pulp magazines. They used to call them novelettes, right? I mean, like Chandler's Killer in the Rain and stuff like that. There was good solid 40, 50 pages of print, so those are novellas, I think. Long
Well,
story.
it gets tricky when you start talking about page count, because as you guys well know,
Yeah.
you can really monkey with that in terms of the size of the
Yeah.
point size, the white space, the leading, how big are the margins,
You got a lot of
you know,
short sentences, a lot of short paragraphs, a lot of dialogue of one or two words.
right. A lot of white space,
Yeah.
or it could be broken up into multiple chapters, and then there's big page and a half breaks between the end of one chapter, quote unquote, and the beginning of another. So you really play with that. I remember I forget the name of it, but Don DeLillo had a new novel come out a few years ago, and it was like this, and I read it. It was about the early days of the pandemic and a blackout in New York City, et cetera. And I didn't count every word, obviously, but I calculated. I counted on some lines and some pages. I think I came up with like 17,000 words for this book that was clearly labeled a novel. Whatever. And a couple of the books that we do in this long story novella course I'm teaching, like Toni Morrison's Home, which I love that book. It's a retelling of Homer's Odyssey. And then Joyce Carol Oates' Black Water, which is a retelling of the Chappaquiddick, incident with Ted Kennedy. Those are both clearly labeled novels on their covers, but I certainly think of them more in the novella range lengthwise. But the other issue I bring up in the class is that the only criteria? To me, if a work has a particular level of complexity, then that also tends to maybe elevate it from novella to novel status. So it's obviously a very abstract kind of thing, and who's going to judge that? But it's a marketing thing. I mean, for obviously decades, the novella was kind of persona non grata in the publishing biz. So even if it was in that kind of in between range, publishers would call it a novel, to try to boost sales and things like that. So
I
yeah.
wonder too if it's like, we're sticking to words, but maybe it's also the elevated meaning of it, like you were saying, Ted. Maybe the amount of characters, maybe the complex plot is it got two, three strands of plot as opposed to like a short story often has one. So yeah, I think there's different layers that we could look at. I think of some short stories have two to five characters, and those work. And I think Great Gatsby has a bunch of characters in it. You got your central characters, and then you got Tom Buchanan, and you got Jordan Baker, and you got the auto mechanic guy, and you got his wife, and there's all kinds of there's the gay fella at the party who Nick ends up in his bed with. Uh, yeah, there's tons of, and the story kind of goes sideways at times. So to me, Gatsby's a novel. I've never counted the words. It reads fast, but it's a novel because of the
Well, I remember just a few years ago was the first time I heard anybody consider that a novella, and I was like, "What?" I've grown up on the novel, The Great Gatsby. Another work I used to do in this class, we used to have 11-week sessions, and we cut it down to 8 weeks. So I had to trim the reading list, which is always painful. But I used to have them read Brokeback Mountain. And I always say this really doesn't count in a long story novella, because I think I calculated just a little over 6,000 words. But I always like to include it because it's a great example of what lengthwise is pretty clearly a short story. But boy, is it expansive. It takes place over years and years and years, and you've got multiple characters and really obviously, intense emotional scenes and complex issues. And I don't know how Annie Proulx does it, packs all that into 6,000 words or so. But I think it's, again, a great example of, being able to tell a really complex story, even in the short story form.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think, Grant, you were the one that floated the idea of our maybe touching on the issue of writing in first person versus third person, and how does a writer make that decision? And we all kind of immediately, I think, said, yeah, that would be a good idea. Do you want to maybe give us some backstory there, why you were thinking about that in the first place?
Oh, gosh. I don't know why. I just know it comes over me. Sometimes I'll start something in limited third, and then I feel the urge to tell it in first person. And I've even written some stories in objective, camera Hemingway style, where I can kind of be in this limited third, but a series of limited thirds, and uh, bounce around to different characters. Yeah, I don't know. I just I find it fascinating, and I guess what got me thinking about it is I, I I dislike in workshop when somebody tells someone to switch the point of view. I just think that's to me a sin. Like, um, you better. I don't know. Like the first choice a writer makes when they start really committing to the story they're writing, I think, is the point of view, and um, you better have a good reason for just suggesting somebody change their point of view. It just doesn't feel right to me. So, I kind of wanted to explore the why of it. I got asked a question one time, and I couldn't answer it. Like, well, why'd you, there's things I like about first person, there's things I like about limited third. I've loved limited third because, as I've said before, I felt it gives me a little bit of that recollected and tranquility quality that I like, where I can walk close alongside a character, but it's not hot. Everything's not hot. Whereas in first person, I also like that because then it can be hot, and it just depends on what I want in terms. Do I want to be like the Romantic poets and that recollected and tranquility thing, or do I want to be like some of the YA stuff where it's a hot poker in your face type of thing. So, and part of it's genre convention. Like a lot of detective stories aren't. I remember reading one time. It was very simplified, and I don't agree with it. A detective story is written in first person. A crime story is written in third. And I'm like, really? I mean, I've seen crime stories in first person, but I like them both. But the Eddie Sands stories are interesting to me because Hayden is always in first, but Eddie, I don't know what's going to happen when I start writing an Eddie Sands story. I've written probably half of them in limited third and half of them in first, and I don't know what motivates me to do it. So that's why I wanted to ask you guys.
Mhm.
I'm trying to figure out my own process, and I have no idea. Just suddenly I'm like, I'm going to do this in limited third, and I don't know why that happens. And then I'm working on a new one right now, and it's coming out in limited third. And the previous one that I've got coming out in Black Cat Weekly is first person. So I don't get it. That's what got me thinking about it.
Well, I've got some thoughts, but let me get Brady in on this. You've had a few weeks to contemplate to this. I'm sure that's all you've been doing too in the last few weeks is contemplating first versus third. And so, now, what are your thoughts on that?
No, well, so this coincidentally, this question was put to me by my daughter, and so I want to give a shout out to the Hazelnut. As I think I've mentioned on the podcast, she and a number of friends edited a book that's now out in its second printing. Even the River Starts Small, about experiences in frontline environmental activism camps. So she has experience with publication, and she just recently had a short story accepted for an anthology. And so we were talking, and she posed this question: how do you choose point of view? She was working on a news story and had been experimenting with a couple of different ways of trying to set it up. And so we've my daughter and I have had this a bit of an ongoing conversation, and yeah, I find it really interesting. Like one of the things I made mention, and I won't recreate our entire conversations, but I myself, and I'm curious what you guys think. I don't trust third person omniscient because stories are human things, and who could possibly know all these points of view and all these minds? So limited third or first person. And what I talked about with Hayes was in part how much information and how do you want to present information? If you want to withhold, um, who knows what when, and so all those considerations are woven into point of view. So, and but I will go out. This is I'll wind up, but this I'll go along with Grant. Like something happens that's not wholly, or in my experience, in my control. But when I'm thinking through a story, I hear the voice, and it emerges. Not always with me being very calculating or self-conscious about the point of view. I just hear it from a first person point of view, or there needs to be that little bit more distance with a close third. And so it's in conceiving or conceptualizing the story or kind of getting an idea and starting to work through, it seems like the voice emerges, the point of view emerges in that process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it's all really interesting, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but I think the story, just by serendipitously, the choice that it's a really interesting story to talk about in terms of point of view. But we'll save that for just a few minutes later. But I was thinking about that when Grant posed it, and I know that early in my writing career, I really was in love with first person. And I wrote just about everything in first person. I had this, in retrospect, I guess I feel it's kind of a misguided notion, but I felt like to do that, I needed to have protagonists who it was plausible they would be really good writers. Not to fan my own ego here, but so in other words, a lot of times my protagonists would be like journalists or poets or something. It didn't make any sense to me to have I don't know, some manual labor person be able to write poetically and beautifully. I mean, I know that's very condescending because I'm sure there's lots of great, writers out there who don't write for a living or aren't literary people. So I know it's all messed up, but that was my thinking. But the other thing I was thinking about was the very first short story I got published in kind of a meaningful way. I've mentioned before was in Paris Transcontinental. And I've written this story in workshop, very autobiographical. It was actually a frame story, and both the inside and the frame were autobiographical, painfully so. So I wrote it in first person, and it was okay received, and so I decided I wanted to send that out. But at the same time, I wanted to play with it a little bit. So I thought, well, what happens if I just take all of the I, my, words and make it he, his, and basically take a first person narrative and turn it into a third person narrative with virtually no changes to the story other than just the pronoun. And it gave it a little more distance from me. And I felt like it didn't feel so highly autobiographical. And so I sent it out as a third person narrative, close third person, obviously, because it had been first person. And, it got picked up. And like I said, it was really my first significant. And I use that experience. I mentioned in another podcast that I used to teach, these introductory creative writing classes. And one of the things I discovered was that if I had my students write kind of a memoir piece to begin with, an autobiographical first person story about something that really happened to them and then fictionalized it, that they actually could write some pretty solid short stories. And one of the ways I would encourage them to fictionalize it was to take the I's and make it he, or, make it the other gender, even if that made sense, to even make it further removed. And that seemed to work pretty well. So I do think there is a potential distancing from the author, depending on whether you're writing first person or third. I was a guest on another podcast. I felt like I was cheating on you guys, but I was a guest on a 2-month review podcast, and it's a really interesting podcast. Everyone should check it out after they get done listening to us, where they take these big books, the kind of books that Brady's been doing in his class, and they'll spend basically 2 months. That's where they get the name, talking about this big book, like chapter by chapter per episode. And they're now doing William Gass's The Tunnel. And so they had me on to talk about that. And one of the things I mentioned was that Gass in The Tunnel specifically and deliberately wrote a first person narrator who is really, really similar to Gass himself. Same name, William Kohler versus William Gass. A history professor at a university like Purdue. When Gass started it, he was a philosophy professor at Purdue. And there's all sorts of autobiographical stuff. But on the other hand, this William Kohler, the narrator of The Tunnel, is a pretty awful guy and anti-Semitic, et cetera, et cetera. And so when the novel came out, there was such close connection between William Gass, the author, and William Kohler, his narrator, that a lot of people thought, oh my God, William Gass is like a closeted anti-Semitic person all these years. And he's this horrible misogynist and blah, 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 blah. And Gass claimed that he laid that trap for readers and critics to see if they could distinguish between a narrative voice versus his own persona, his own real persona. And he said most of them failed. So I think the lesson we can take from that is I think readers do have a tendency to connect a first-person narrator with the writer themselves. And so by doing a third person, maybe you discourage that connection. What do you guys think about that? Do you think a lot of readers default to thinking, well, a first person narrator, especially if it seems likely to be sort of plausibly autobiographical, assume it is autobiographical, whereas a third person point of view where readers are less likely to jump to that conclusion? Grant, what do you think about that hypothesis?
I had not thought about that, and I should have. Because I would definitely, full confession here, transparency. It's a big word nowadays, transparency. I always wonder about transparency. Like, do we not respect people's individual privacy? It depends on how far we go with that. But anyway, when it comes to myself, Hayden Fuller's a lot more like Grant than Eddie Sands is. And maybe you've answered my question. Maybe sometimes because the cruelty that is Eddie, sometimes I just feel this. And maybe I know that the story is going to be a little more two-fisted and a little more brutal, that I slip in a third person. I didn't even think about that, to be honest with you. Whereas me and Hayden's philosophies are fairly closely aligned. So that's interesting. And I hadn't thought about that, but I think there's something there. And I do know, I'm always telling students, I mean, I should have thought of this myself, because I'm always telling students in workshop, quit thinking about the character as the writer in the class, because we have to, when Hemingway has a character say the N-word, then for me that's characters talking. But when Hemingway, like in The Killers, has it in his objective camera voice, the N-word, then that's problematic. Yeah, I'm agreeing with you. That's all I got to say on that. Let's hear what Brady thinks.
Yeah, Brady, what are your thoughts on that potential distancing effect?
Yeah, well, first let me say this, that I don't want to cross paths with Eddie Sands. I don't like my odds. Hayden, I think I can get along with. Like, you could talk to Hayden. Eddie's not going to give you much time. You're gonna meet a bad end abruptly. I think. So yeah, no, I would like to defend the difference between a first person narrator and the writer. Like, I want to be able to create people who are not me and who speak from their point of view. That's a serious challenge for me. So in A Journey for Al Ramal, Bernard, as you guys know, I wear everybody out with my stories and photographs, but I love to hike. I love to go into the wilderness. I love to travel, like we all do. But I'm not him. I wouldn't make his decisions, right? And yes, I understand what it means to walk a long way, because I do that. And so that's useful and that's helpful, but he's not me. So yeah, so I would but I do think the third does give that distance. And yeah, how much readers want to identify the author with the characters? I mean, it's pretty hard in The Sun Also Rises. Like, don't we always think, when we're talking about Jake, don't we always think of Hemingway and his service on the Italian front and ambulance? And I mean, it's pretty damn close.
Well, and of course, obviously, like Kerouac and his stuff, I mean, it literally was autobiographical.
Yeah, I mean, Neil Cassidy, they all show up.
Yeah. Before they could publish it, had to go in and change all of the real people's names to fake names or whatever. The other thing, but kind of coming full circle back to Grant's original, thought that he shared with us when we started this conversation. This Edgar Allan Poe inspired character and novel that I'm working on is actually a sequel to my novel An Untimely Frost, which had a narrator inspired by Washington Irving. And I wrote that novel in first person. The novel came out in 2014, but it took me about 5 years to write it. So, I'd been working on it since, the early 2000s. And I really liked that first person narrative voice that I wound up with for that book. And so this new book that I'm working on, I've taken the Swinford is the name of the character, and he appears in that book off and on, but now he's the central character in this new thing I'm working on. But I thought, since it's a sequel to An Untimely Frost, and that's in first person, I'll just use first person again for this book. So I started trying to write it in first person, and it just didn't feel right. And I don't know if it's because I've mainly been writing in third person for the last several years, so now first person feels weird, or if there were just something about the narrative itself that didn't seem to work in first person. And that's happened to me a couple of times. My novel, The Artist Spoke, I started writing that in first person, and partway through it, it just didn't feel right. So I went back and changed it all into third person. And that just felt better, felt more natural for the story that I wanted to tell. But I don't really know why. I mean, I'm just kind of following some instinct there that I can't put my finger on. So.
Yeah. Sorry, Ted, I was talking over top of you. Yeah, I think in The Artist Spoke, I think the third works really well because there's mystery and like I as I was said earlier, as said to my daughter, it's about the management and the presentation of information. The difference between plot versus story and who knows what when. And so the third does give that. I mean, it works really well in The Artist Spoke, that kind of distance and what's going on and who's who and the relationships. Yeah, that distance I think is pretty key to the success of that narrative.
Yeah, well,
that's one reader report.
Yeah,
there you go. Well, go ahead, Grant.
Just real quick. I mean, I like first for detective stories because I like filtering everything through the single consciousness, because then the whole world is scary. Like it's like the whole world's full of uncertainty, and we just have this one person we're walking with. I mean, I'm not saying anything profound here. It's like restricted narration. We only know as much as our detective hero, and hopefully my readers aren't smarter than him, because there's nothing I find more frustrating than when I'm reading a good detective novel to be 2 steps ahead of the detective. That just irks me.
Right.
So that's a balancing act that I kind of like doing as a writer, is having someone who's smart, is filtering all this knowledge, trying to figure stuff out, but at the same time, the reader isn't ahead of him, and that's a tricky type.
Well, one of the things I was kind of thinking about as you've been talking about all this and the difference between Hayden and Eddie, et cetera, is I was trying to imagine the Hayden Fuller novels with third person narration, and it just doesn't work very well for me. I think they work as well as they do because of the first person, and I think when Hayden is in peril, as he as he invariably is,
Often is. Yeah.
that we feel. I mean, I'm more on the edge of my seat and more emotionally invested in those scenes because I feel this closeness with Hayden that I don't think I would feel, or at least not so profoundly, if we were getting the story in third person. Obviously, we'll never know, but I think there is something to that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm totally pulling for Hayden, right? Like we're on his side, and
Right.
it has something to do with the voice. It has something to do, I think, with the first person. I mean, and again, I think you're exactly right. We'll never know unless, Grant does a substitution version.
No. Nope.
Yeah, but that proximity to Hayden's thought process and his peril, yeah, it's very involving for the reader.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think we need to switch gears here to the featured story. But before we do, just one last thing. The sonnets to Mary Shelley are literally that. Each sonnet is written to her, so it's a second person point of view. I mean, each is kind of almost a little flash fiction narrative. Each sonnet is about some aspect of her life or whatever, but it's all to you, Mary Shelley, and that gives a different feel as well. And obviously, there are some, short stories, novels out there. There's a Joyce Carol Oates short story that's widely anthologized, but 1,000 Joyce Carol Oates stories are widely anthologized. But I used to teach it way back when in an American Lit class, and I think it's called The Journey or Your Journey or something. But it's all in second person, and it works really, really well because it puts the reader in the position of the narrator, obviously, because you are the narrator. And so I don't know, have either of you tried a second person point of view in anything you've written, a story or anything like that?
Oh, hell no. I think that's so hard. Like I like it in lyric poetry. Like, Richard Hugo, when he puts you, the last good kiss you had, like, that works pretty well. Like you get, but I think in a story, it's I one of the other things that I think is kind of equally challenging to that is writing a story in the present tense.
Mm.
Like there's things that writers do, and some people do these things kind of really well. But I mean the objective point of view that Grant spoke of in Hemingway, I love that. Like I really like that. Keep that distance. Keep things kind of icy, and all you can do is the same as we do in life. Is just kind of see what's going on and think. Um, yeah, yeah. I'll stop. I'll
Yeah,
stop nattering. I'm
and I
nattering.
just
Yeah.
I'm gonna natter for a second. It's just a personal thing, and I've read really good point of view stories, but I always find either when I try them or when I read them, they seem so judgmental to me. And my goal as a writer is to try to, even though Hayden's judging everything because he's trying to solve a murder, I got that McGray thing in my blood, and I want to write empathetic characters who see the world in gray, and not just McGray, but in gray, and aren't super Eddie's judgmental. But that's what I like about Hayden. He's not as judgmental, and he often finds things to respect about people. And so, yeah, when I see those points of view, at least when my students try, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I just always feel a little uncomfortable. And I'm like, no, you're saying all people are like this. It feels a little essentializing to me. It's a problem for me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
No, well, maybe in December, maybe we can take up the question of present tense versus past and future tense. Oh my gosh, let's get
Oh my
radical.
God. Yeah. I
But
do love flash forwards. This story has one. How's that for a transition?
Prolepsis.
Let's do it. I'm sorry, Brady. Were you trying to say something?
No, just the technical term for a flash forward. The
Which
literary
is
narratology term, isn't it prolepsis?
Is
yeah,
that what
yeah.
it is? I didn't know that. You guys are always the brainiacs. I've never heard that before. It sounds like something that happens to a uterus. I don't know.
I was going to say last time I was at the urologist, I think he performed that on me.
Okay. Yep. All right. Get to the story, boys.
So we've read a story. We were actually going to do this for our October podcast because I wanted to pick something that's kind of scary, and I think there's a lot of scary things about this story, even though it's not technically a ghost story or something. But then we decided not to do it because we were limited time, so we saved it for this episode. But it's from, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, from Mississippi Review, volume 53, numbers 1 and 2, which is 2025, summer 2025, so pretty darn recent. And this is the winner of their fiction prize, Tracy Neiman, Neiman. So I think that's how you pronounce that. And the title of the story is The Last Avocado on Earth. And as we normally do, I'll read the first paragraph, which is a fairly healthy chunk of text, and then give just a real brief synopsis of what the story kind of is about from there on forward. And then I definitely am anxious to hear what you guys have to say about the prize-winning story, The Last Avocado on Earth. And it begins. Izzy dreams of avocados again. Heaven help her. She is on her knees, lips to the ground, tonguing the soil for seeds. She's too goddamn old for this, she thinks. Too goddamn old to be contorting her body like a common garden snake, if only in her own mind. Besides, she'll be back in the dirt soon enough. Too soon. But Izzy's not a lucid dreamer. Her dream self insists on being there, and all Izzy can do is watch. the stubborn old bat. She watches in horror as her dream self swallows the first seed she finds, and an avocado tree grows in her stomach. She watches as the tree bursts through her throat and out of her mouth, then winds itself around her neck. She watches immobilized until the tree becomes Izzy, or Izzy the tree. Then Lena and Pierre are there, and they're clambering up her trunk while she watches, rooted to the earth. Before long, her grandchildren are ruffling her leaves, plucking ripe fruit from her branches, their little lips mustached and green. Of course, neither of them will ever taste an avocado. She herself hasn't tasted one in decades, but the memory of them, it seems, is imprinted on her tongue, their tender flesh, the earthy cream of them. All right, so that is the opening of The Last Avocado on Earth, and we're introduced to Izzy, our protagonist, and she is, we find out a little bit later, she's 88 years old. She's close to death, she assumes. She's, suffering from dementia. She can remember the past vividly, but can't remember what happened yesterday or this morning or the conversation that she'd just been having. She's in a horrible, some sort of assisted living center with very little assistance. Oftentimes in the story, she is visited by her son, Nicholas. And a lot of the story is in flashback about what she remembers from her past. She was an archivist, and so she feels the loss of things particularly profoundly. And it's not just avocados. We're told fairly quickly that honey, bananas, chocolate, and strawberries have also disappeared from the earth because of climate change and so on. And so anyway, it's a very, frenetic story in terms of, again, shifting back and forth in time. Again, she's more than an unreliable narrator. She is literally a narrator who can't remember her own story. And so there's all sorts of interesting authorial sort of assertions, which is, again, kind of an interesting element given our, focus on first versus third person and so on. I think that's a decent introduction to the story. Let me get your thoughts on The Last Avocado on Earth. Brady, what did you think about this story?
Yeah, no, I like this story very well. And I think it's really interesting in conversation with a number of the stories that we've read and discussed over the course of the podcast here on episode 1942. There's a lot of anxiety in contemporary fiction about women's bodies. Right, there's all these metamorphoses or transitions or monstrous changes. The body is forward, and we've read a number of these stories, and they sometimes have some of the implication of or touches of or some modest energy of the surreal or magic realism, and so this one is quietly frightening. It's about, as Ted has mentioned, it's about the effects of global warming. So it's right where we're living today, and the loss of habitat and the loss of green things. But there's something going on, and I won't give away any of the details. But there's changes going on in Izzy, in addition to, if we can rely on the narration. She is suffering from dementia, but there are other things happening to her which are really interesting and bring this energy and mystery and creepiness to the story. So I think it's pretty successful. I'll stop nattering.
Yeah, no, that was all very good. Grant, what are your thoughts?
I love the story, and Brady, brilliant as always. I'm going to talk about something a little more simple than you guys. You always blow me away with the level of quantum physics to your thinking. I dig just the world building, like just from a simple level for writers out there. And Ted, you covered a lot of the ground, and we start off. Besides, she'll be back in the dirt soon enough. It's sort of presaging what's going to happen. That she's going to die. We find out in the second to last paragraph. I won't give away the last paragraph. She dies. All right. She's 88. Okay. So we've got a hint of that. Then we introduce Lena and Pierre. First paragraph, and it's a dream, but yet the dream is also a reality because there are no avocados. And I'm like, oh wow, this is wild. And so it's like that whole the planet's going to blow up in 2050, whatever all those Nostradamuses are saying about doomsday clock and Earth disintegrating. And so we've got that level to the world building. Then we got the dementia level. This is paragraph 4. What is yesterday underneath the never-ending sameness of fluorescent light? Surely, when you are dying in place, the definition of yesterday is entitled to a wider berth. Yesterday, then we get a whole narrative telling, half-scene flashback about yesterday's in her life. Brilliant. And then more narrative to the next paragraph, more narrative telling, flashback, half scene about 23 and having to deal with dying parents and all of that. And then I want on page 2, paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. She's turning into an avocado. Oh my God. Paragraph 7. Like, look at this world building, dream. There's a reality to the dream. Then there's dementia. And then there's having to deal with taking care of parents. And then there's he's staring at the patches of green on Izzy's neck, simultaneously trying to pretend that he isn't. And again, that's that wonderful point of view that we have. And I'm only 2 pages in. And then we get the use of the word in paragraph, 8, 9, molecular level, which is a term she comes back to in a different register at the end of the story. And then we have the archivist, another piece of world building, and the archivist becomes a coda at the very end of the story. So we set up something here at the beginning, and then we have a callback to it at the end. And then we get the story about, I don't remember, she goes off on a toot. The marriage is falling apart. This is all within the first 4 pages. So if you want to see how to, like, I'm always getting these things in workshop about, and students always say info dumping, and I'm so sick of that term. There's too much info dumping here. This story begins with info dumping, but it's integrated and it works. And there's just so much nuance and layering that the rest of the story is going to follow through. Like within the first 4 pages, complexities abound, narrative telling done brilliantly. I love it. That's all I have to say at this point at the juncture. And I'll stop.
Okay. Well, I'm glad Brady mentioned that in our podcast, we seem to have sort of these reoccurring types of stories. The women with body, image issues and concerns about the body. And as Grant points out, she's turning green. She seems to be becoming, what she dreams of. And I think, again, of like Rose Keating's story that we read that had body, image issues. We read the story about vomiting up spiders, earlier than that. And, but then at the same time, we also have had stories about this particular fear, very genuine fear of things going extinct. We had that story just 2 or 3 episodes ago, Everything Must Go, about people having to get onto rockets because the earth was dying and they were going to go somewhere better, they were told. But it's also interesting in that story, if you recall, everyone was encouraged to make like a digital record of their life to take with them. And here the story begins, well, not begins, but very quickly we find out that Izzy's job was, as an archivist, was digitizing records and so forth. So it seems like, again, a lot of writers out there are tapping into the same kind of fears and concerns and so forth. And it's interesting is like, are there that many more writers doing it? Or are editors out there more open, more have their antenna extended looking for these kinds of stories because of the way they are feeling about the world? Or am I picking the stories that are published that fall into these categories because my antennae are, poised to this part of the universe or whatever. And it's probably some combination thereof. But it is interesting that we have had so many stories that fall into very similar patterns. I don't want to get too far afield because there's so much more to say about this story. But, so many times my students are racking their brains trying to come up with a really original, really creative plot for their thesis or for their whatever. And it's like, don't worry about that. What narratologists have come up with, maybe there's like 9 basic stories that we've been telling each other for millions of years. And, and it's not about, wholly original plots. It's about how you tell them, the style in which you tell them, what you can kind of reveal about the world via these sort of archetypal plots and so forth. So I think we have some really good examples here of really talented writers who are tapping into very, very similar vibes and being very successful, not just publishing stories in, very well-respected journals, but in several cases winning, prizes with these kinds of stories. So anyway, I think that's an interesting phenomenon in and of itself. I don't know. Do you guys have any things you want to say about that?
I do want to just say, I do think there is something cyclical to what happens in our field. And it's not a criticism, just an observation. Like a few years back, there were a lot of working class stories I was seeing. It became a thing. And I'm talking maybe 20 years ago. And then suddenly with MAGA and what was going on with the working class voting Republican instead of Democrat and tending to be more on the wrong side of history, shall we say. You started seeing less and less working class stories, in especially about white men, and that's just a shift that's happened. And I think right now, in a response to Mr. Trump, who I almost choked when I said it, and the MAGA and all of that, there's a dystopic feeling. Like I really thought with the pandemic, we were going to have more hopeful stories. As an editor, that's where I thought we were going to go as a response to the scary thing. When the pandemic happened, everybody was reading books like Fahrenheit 451. If you went to Amazon, those are the big sellers. Brave New World, 1984, blah, blah, blah. I can understand that psychologically, but I think we're still seeing that. I mean, in my classes, I have a lot of high fantasy written by students, but I have a lot of dystopic stuff, like in this story where things are disappearing, the planet's dying. We have to go somewhere else, and I think it's just a cycle that's not meant in a condescending way. Fiction goes through. I mean, like in the '80s, I remember so many. Charles Baxter talked about this. So many stories were about victims, and so many stories were about what he called dysfunctional narratives, where we couldn't understand what was happening to us. And people see that as a response to Reagan. And so there was just a whole variety of fictions where we didn't know who to point the finger at, and we end up pointing it at nobody, and we can't solve anything. And if you looked at the best stories of 1980, 81, 82, and read those collections, you would see a lot of these kinds of stories. And I do think there's patterns. And right now we're in a kind of, and that's, again, I love this story. Don't get me wrong. I would have published it. I wish our Vonnegut Prize that I'm reading for right now would have something as good as this. I'd pay $1,000 for a story like this. But yeah, it's there's trends and zeitgeist, whatever you want to call it, and I think we're in a trend right now of this dystopic stuff, and we are destroying the planet. It's not just this is fiction, imagination run amok. There's reasons to be concerned, global warming, all that stuff. So yeah, this is right in that wheelhouse, but it's still original. Like it's like you were saying, Ted. There's archetypal stories, and it's what we do within those archetypes, and this is doing something within that that style or genre of writing that's very fresh and very exciting. I mean, I couldn't stop reading it. I've read it 3 times, and I don't usually do that for these podcasts. Just want to say.
All right, Brady, do you have anything you want to hop on there?
Well, no, I would agree with Grant and you as well, Ted, and I will reach back to our live podcast and talking about vampires. One of the things maybe didn't have time to say then, or only sort of alluded to it, is why do monster stories persist is because there's something horrifying. There are horrifying things in the world, and so we keep seeing these patterns in these stories because what is going on is horrifying.
Mhm.
Right. We are frightened, and nobody, like our public officials, don't seem to care. Like what they want to do is just enrich themselves and get rid of regulations and vaccines and all those kinds of things. Yeah. So this I agree. The pattern makes sense. They speak to the time. And why does one of the things, people say this is just standard routine uh, understanding. Why does Stephen King, one of the best for my money anyway, one of the best American writers for the last decades, why does he write horror stories? Because there's something horrifying in the culture. There's something frightening at work in a powerful nation, and it taps the zeitgeist. So there's that, and I'll just throw out one more thing, but and this is just to circle back to the matter of point of view, and just to touch on what Grant was saying earlier about how much is set up in the first few pages. It's the narrative voice, I think.
Yeah.
It's the style, it's the language. There's a certain tone struck that brings all these things together. Yeah, it's very well done. Sorry, Ted. I think you wanted to. Yeah.
Well, no, no. I was going to say I definitely want to say a couple more things, or look at a couple of examples of that interesting point of view, that narrative posture. But the other thing I want to make sure that I got into this conversation, because I do see it problematically in a lot of my students' writing. Um, like several pages into the story, it's been set in, other than her during, via her flashbacks, it's been set in this horrible assisted living center, or hospice, or whatever it is, and we don't really get a description of it until page 74. This is several pages into the story. Nicholas swivels his head around the room. Izzy watches him take in the indiscriminate brown stains on the ceiling, the warping linoleum floors, walls the color of Pepto-Bismol, the window, such as it is, has bars. One of the fluorescent lights flickers on and off incessantly. But again, we've been in this space without this description of it for several pages. And this is something I learned when I was working on my master's, and it was just like a thunderbolt out of the blue. And it's like, why, as a, avid, critically minded reader, because I was a little older when I went back and got my master's. I was in my 30s by the time I finished. Didn't I pick up on this before? But we actually were reading Faulkner's The Bear, which, as you guys know, is one of my now I think of it as one of the greatest novellas in the American literature canon, and I love that story. But Faulkner does this thing where we go pages and pages and pages without practically any physical description of the characters. And then in the climactic moment with the bear attack towards the end of the novella, we finally get a description of the main character. And it's like, we didn't need it until then. And so many of my students, and I probably fell into this, pretty badly when I was a younger writer, feel like as soon as they introduce a character, they've got to describe that character so the reader can visualize the character. As soon as they, introduce a place, a setting, they have to describe the room, the car, the whatever it is. And it just slows the hell out of the narrative. They just have got a really interesting story underway, and then we got to read a paragraph about, well, they were wearing this kind of jacket, and they had these kind of shoes, and they had these kind of earrings. Oh my God. It's like, first of all, you probably don't need all that, period, but you definitely don't need that now. If we need to know some things about the physical description, about the setting, work it in later after you've already really got us hooked into the story. So I think that's another really master stroke of this writer. We don't get a lot of the description until we kind of need it throughout the story. It's not just all shoved at us right at the beginning of the story. Grant, I see you're nodding there. Is that a phenomenon with less experienced writers you've seen also?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I call it the descriptive pause. I'm just not sure. Not that that's original. I stole it from narratologists and guys like Seymour Chapman. But yeah, I'm like, do we need this right now? Do I need to know everything that's in the card? Now, like for mystery writing, you want to like the room reflects the character's psychology. And so if you look around a room and there's a bunch of paintings on the wall, and there's one thing that's like I remember in Red Dragon, I think there's a description of all these books, and there was one book that stood out that was different, and it had bodies, I can't remember if it was on tables, autopsy photos, and that's when the hero knew the bad guy was a sicko because he had this on his shelf. And so like there's a wonderful description in Raymond Chandler's Big Sleep where he goes in to see, and he's riffing on Fitzgerald. I think it's when he goes to see Mrs. Regan. No, Rutledge. I can't remember. In the novel, it's different from the movie. But anyway, he goes into a room and the curtains go all the way to the floor and touch the floor. Like there's all this excess in the room. And it's a way of Chandler telling us that this woman has no self-control, no restraint mechanisms. And that's important to know, especially as a detective is taking in the world around him, trying to stay in the water and stay safe. And so that makes sense. But other stuff like where, Charles Baxter said it best, and I'm bastardizing a quote, but he said, if a story's not working, just putting more physical detail into the story is not going to work. He says it's like putting lingerie on the banal. And I kind of like that description. So if you got a car and then you put a Hearst shifter in the car and some fuzzy dice on the rearview mirror, and maybe leopard skin, stuff on the seats, that's not going to be enough to make the story better. It's probably a problem with your plot or your main character or whatever. But students just seem to think, not all of them, but some of them, oh, if I just do a little more detailing here, that's gonna, if they can see the world of the story, they're gonna like immerse themselves in this story. And sometimes you got bigger problems to fry than that. So,
well, I definitely want Brady in here, but you reminded me of something we talked about in Cedar Falls. I told you guys that one of the workshop comments that absolutely drives me batty is people say, "Oh, I could really visualize, I really could see the characters. I could really." And so when I used to teach in person, I don't do this online because I can't get the facial expression to take the venom out of the comment. But I used to say something like, "Okay, black cat," and then I say, "Did you see a cat?" And they'd say, "Yeah." I say, "Okay, it doesn't take that much skill." Okay. So anyway, Brady, what are your thoughts on that, saving the details until they're actually needed in the story?
Oh well, I mean, if somebody reads Faulkner closely, I'm teaching Faulkner in the spring semester, and I mean, do what he does. I mean, maybe not so complicated because nobody can read those books anymore. Maybe we don't have the attention spans for it. But yeah, I think it's great, and I certainly am someone who will indulge a description or two. So I can let the air out of any narrative because I like place. I like
Right.
physical settings. I like a sense of the landscape and the weather. Yeah. So yeah, guilty.
Well, of course, there's a difference between writing a novel or even a novella versus a short story. Obviously, a short story probably have to rein it in a little
Move
bit
it
more.
along. Yeah, yeah, sorry. I've been thinking in the writing of stories, you guys have such influence on me. I'm trying to take the Eddie Sands approach. Like, man, just move this thing along. Like, someone needs a beating and it's going to happen pretty damn quick. That's how the narrative's got to go.
yeah.
Well, we're probably starting to run up against the extent of our viewers and listeners, length of time that they can tolerate us. But I did want to come back a little bit more to this really interesting authorial posture that the author has. Before I do that, though, before I forget, let me share a little bit about the author. And this is from the contributors' notes in the back of Mississippi Review. Tracy Neiman is a queer writer and globetrotter from Brooklyn before Brooklyn was cool. Her work appears in Flash Fiction Magazine, contest runner-up, and American Literary Review, contest finalist, and has been recognized for its literary merit by the Sewanee Review. She recently completed an MFA in fiction at Brooklyn College and is at work on her debut novel. I looked online. I didn't have a whole lot of time because I kind of basically just did it a few minutes before we started. And she does have a website, tracyneiman.com. Doesn't say a whole lot more there than what this little note says. I noticed that she did have another writing credit with Ninth Letter. U of I, Champagne's really well-respected literary journal, so that's cool. And I noticed that she has representation. So I didn't see a novel listed, but it looks like she has an agent. So my guess would be she's completed a novel manuscript, and it's now with an agent trying to be placed. So if that's the case, good luck to her and her agent, obviously. But I wanted to come back to the story briefly on page 74 again. Just so happens, there's a really interesting parenthetical authorial assertion here, and it's not the only time she does this in the story, but again, we've got this close third person point of view, but that person that's the focus can't remember anything about what's going on in the near near in the now of the story, the here and now. So towards the end of that page, there's a little quote that says, "I won't bring it up again," she says, and then in parentheses, "She will in 2 days' time have forgotten this conversation ever happened." And that's the writer of the story, the whatever you want to say, the author of the story, just giving us some information, because there's no other way, really. I guess there could be other ways, but I think it's a really effective way, but yet it's also very unusual. We don't normally encourage younger writers, for example, to just insert their own voice basically into the story to explain things, but it's kind of necessary here because of the character's dementia, etc. And again, there's a few other places. I think that may be the most typographically obvious, but it happens, on a few occasions in the story. I don't know, Brady, did you notice that going on, that sort of authorial assertion? Do you have any thoughts on that in terms of why she does it, if it's effective, or anything along those lines?
Well, yeah, no, I think no, it's very effective, and we've all what I like about this, it's our author is really thoughtful. Like we all come up to points in stories where we come to a problem. We've written ourselves into a corner. We have a problem with point of view, and I keep saying across this episode, who knows what when. And so this is a kind of ingenious solution to the problem of a character with dementia who can't remember. So it can't be, in the first person. How would they be telling us this story? How would it make sense to us? And so it requires that narrative voice to step in. And I don't think just anybody could get away with this or could pull it off, but it works really well here.
Grant, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a technique that and I know I've probably mentioned this on other podcasts, but I discovered first with the playwright, Thornton Wilder, and in our town, where you're watching this and it's got this homespun thing going on, and you got the stage manager, and talking about burdock and stuff. And then suddenly he'll just tell us that, oh, you see that boy delivering papers? Yeah, he died, First World War or whatever. And,
Right.
had all this talent. He was going to be a big engineer. And you're just, holy shit, it just pulls you kind of out of it shocks the system. Like it pulls you out of nostalgia or whatever vibe you think our town is. Because our town's a very complicated play. It's one that I think is very underrated because so many high schools do it. So people think it's schmaltzy, but I actually think it's a brilliant work of art. And when I saw Wilder do that, I started doing that in stories, and it's just a really cool technique that kind of it's not you can break the fourth wall almost like the character. You can have the character having a vision of things, seeing into the future, and or just so it could be character based. It could be narrator based. There's just time slips. Like there's just a lot you can do. I don't know. You guys called it what? Prolapsus. What was that word? So
Sure.
anyway,
That's what we called it.
yeah. But anyway, I love it in this story, and like she does it in like I said at the beginning of my response to it, the penultimate, and I'm using the word correctly, second to last paragraph, where she doesn't use parentheses, but she does that what I call that flash forward again. And I love that. And I love that clarification. And something I've discovered recently, and I don't know why it took me so long to realize this, but as an editor, I have a pretty good bullshit detector. And when I'm reading, and let's say I'm having to read like 500 stories and clear out there's there's a point of authority that stories have. And when that authority breaks, I break from the story and give up reading it. So like either the voice is trying too hard to be clever and it goes off on a, obnoxious turn that's I just don't believe, or the character makes a choice that seems implausible to me, or the narrator says something that I'm like, I don't believe you. That's the point of authority. And this story has it, and it's a nebulous thing. It's hard to explain, but the voice is consistent. The voice continues to work, and when the voice does these kinds of leaps, it works because I believe in the point of authority of the authorial voice of the piece. And I can't explain it more than that, but it's just something I've just realized in the last few weeks, like trying to articulate what that is. I used to just say bullshit detector, but now it's more like, no, it's not port of authority like in New York, but it's like this kind of like you're navigating the space of a story, and it breaks down. It doesn't work. This is insincere, or it's inauthentic, or whatever. And this story works for me all the way through.
Well, as you guys know, I'm under contractual obligation to mention William Gass a certain number of times per episode, and yeah,
Gong, flame going across the
Flame
screen.
coming across.
Gass. Well, I mentioned the tunnel earlier. That I was a guest speaking. I'm going to be on 2 more episodes, by the way, in December and January. But he again, the tunnel in part is about the Holocaust, and he describes some horrific, historically accurate things about the Holocaust. But Gass said that one of the challenges he gave himself, not just in that book, basically all of his writing, he said, I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but basically, it's not much of a trick to write beautifully about beautiful things. The real trick is to write beautifully about ugly things and horrible things. And so in the tunnel in particular, he was trying to write beautifully about the Holocaust and about the machine gunning of innocent women and children, et cetera, et cetera. And I think one of the things I love about this story by Tracy Neiman is it's about horrible stuff. This poor woman is losing her ability to think. She's, turning into some sort of green creature. She's estranged from her grandchildren because she scares them. But yet, there's all these beautiful little bits. And I just want to point out a couple of my favorites real quickly, and maybe we can think about wrapping up unless you guys want to keep going, whatever. But she says on top page 73, she was so far outside of herself. This is Izzy, the main character. When she found pearls of blood in her underwear, her first thought had been of their beauty. They were the color of strawberries. And that just blew me away. And then later she writes, the year the avocado was declared functionally extinct, Izzy gave birth, got divorced, and developed green hives on her palms in that order. After Nicholas was born, friends dropped like flies. Everyone was suddenly busy. Izzy knew the truth. What with seas rising like high notes, procreation was no longer in vogue, and mother, quote unquote, had become a dirty word. And then parenthetically, father, bewilderingly, seemed to escape this same fate. And it goes on from there. And it's horrible. So the planet is dying. She's losing her mind. She's turning into this green plant-like creature, and yet the writing is just gorgeous throughout this entire story. So I don't know. Do you guys have any thoughts on, Gass's dictum of it's easy to write beautifully about the beautiful, but it's really hard to write beautifully about the ugly? Grant?
Yeah. Although I'm not disagreeing with the Lord and Master,
I was
Mr.
going to say, I do have the mute button.
But I learned a lot from Hemingway when he wrote those little short little interchapters between stuff in our time, and he could take something horrific like somebody being executed, and yet he wrote about it in because the prose was so beautiful and so restrained and so powerful. The less is more school. So like Hemingway could look at ugly stuff, and I want to write a sentence like that. I want to write a scene like that. But I was thinking about, but I do agree in general, but I think Hemingway can make pretty nasty things look awesome, like at least through restraint. And yet,
well, I think you're agreeing with me.
yes.
It doesn't have to be via Baroque prose. It can be via very restrained, streamlined.
But it's so violent, and yet there's a beauty to it. I feel weird saying that, but I just wanted to, and I guess I do the same thing with my crime stories. I mean, people say, I really like that lyrical moment, blah, blah, blah. Anyway. But page 82, uh, for a few moments, it's just before the space break. They stand in silence this way, Nicholas running his fingers along his mother's skin, Izzy submitting to her child's touch. She shudders. Does it hurt? He asks finally. Only my pride, she says. It ain't so bad, he says after a while. Once you get used to it, it's actually kind of beautiful. So it's interesting that even a character within the diegesis, within the story world, reflects what you're saying is happening at the narrative level. So I think
thank you for pointing that out. I forgot about that line. Yeah, it is really interesting. Yeah. Brady, thoughts on that? Making the ugly beautiful?
No, I agree with everything you said, and but one day we're going to have an honest, open heart-to-heart conversation with this William Gass guy.
Well, we can devote a whole episode to Gass.
Yes, sir. Dedicated to, yeah. Okay, so I have some concluding thoughts.
Yes. Yeah, it's about that time. So you can start us off, and then we'll go around the horn.
Yeah. So to go back to earlier conversation, second person, I'd avoid it. And the matter of point of view, I wonder if over the course of our conversations in the podcast, if one of the things that we have talked about and one of the things I've learned, I hope, from listening to you guys is to listen to the story.
Yeah.
Like, what is the story? What is this? What is this? What is trying to be said? What is going on here? And stories have a life of their own. And I wonder if point of view, the solution to the problem of point of view is at least in part, in some measure, that listening to the story. What is the story telling you about who needs to be telling the story, what the narrative point of view? I wonder if that hasn't been a current across our conversation. And I keep coming back, Ted, to the video that you posted. Don't hold the wheel too tight. Listen, let the thing breathe and let it and listen to it. Let it tell you. Yeah, there you have it. That's my concluding thing.
I'm gonna second that. That's all I got to say. Brady, in the pocket as always. I'm a real believer in impulses and following the muse and listening. And I think when you're humble, it leaves you open to all kinds of possibilities. And I think writing stories is about channeling and being open. So yeah, totally agree with what Brady said.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't really have much more to add to that. I think you guys have ended on some really important notes there. So maybe that ought to be it for this episode. We'll be back together in a month or so for our December episode. And then again, we're looking forward to our Baltimore trip, and I'll come back to what I said at the beginning. If we have any alumni listening who are going to be in Baltimore, we would love to interview you and kind of catch up on what you're doing with your writing, et cetera. And so thanks, guys, for giving some time on a Sunday evening, which was very bizarre for us. And thanks, watchers and listeners.
And our writer for a hell of a story.
Thank you, Tracy Neiman. Check out, call her agent if you're a publisher and see about looking at that manuscript, because I'll bet it is dynamite. So, all right.